Our readings are taken from Rays of the One Light. These are weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda, based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. This week, do you need a guru? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Many people scoff at the idea of having a guru. True to human nature generally, they make a virtue of their scoffing. I am responsible for what I do, they announce, responsible for my mistakes as well as for my victories. What would I ever learn if I handed over my development to someone else? To depend on another for guidance would be an act of spiritual cowardice. It would be understandable for someone gifted with some trivial ability, for instance with words, to insist on doing his crossword puzzle himself without letting anyone else help him. But supposing even in such trivial matters, he had no such gift. What virtue would there be in refusing to learn? For that matter, moreover, where do our gifts come from? They're not a native ability. Still, crossword puzzles are hardly an important challenge. What if a person wanted to do something daring, to climb a cliff, for instance, but refused to study the art of mountain climbing? He would climb at the risk of his life. And how much more is risked than physical life in the great adventure of the divine search, where the risk is to salvation itself? Where is the sacrifice in seeking guidance? Even a mountain guide wouldn't presume to do one's climbing for one. His purpose would be only to help the neophyte to climb safely. To have a wise guru is not a sign of weakness, but of plain common sense. All the saints, aware as they are of the hazards of the adventure, agree on the importance of having a guide or guru. And these are the heroes speaking, not cowards or spiritual weaklings. Jesus emphasized the importance of having a teacher by asking John to baptize him. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 3, we read of his coming to John. Thus, Jesus said to John, "It becometh us to fulfill all righteousness." In the Bhagavad Gita, the 4th chapter, Sri Krishna says, "Open thyself to those who have attained wisdom. They will be thy teachers. Ask questions of them, both verbally and mentally. Serve them faithfully and with devotion." How is the devotee to recognize one who has attained wisdom? The Bhagavad Gita gives us this inspiring description of the sage. "By this sign is he known, being of equal grace to comrades, friends, chance comers, strangers, lovers, enemies, aliens, and kinsmen, loving all alike, evil or good." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
For making the commitment to be here on this gorgeous, very warm summer's day. My name is Surendra. I'm here with Bharati and our blessers, Tambara and Manisha. And of course, it's our joy to be here with you. Do you need a guru? As we learned in our reading this morning, there are hazards which quickly appear in any field of practice when we find ourselves having overreached our level of expertise. Without proper study, skill, and experience, things get pretty dicey. And if we ignore the warning signs that we have come to the limit of our abilities, very apt to find ourselves in a good bit of trouble. This applies to the spiritual path as well. Just as it does in any field of endeavor that requires a progressive measure of proficiency. The climb to communion with God is not exactly an escalator ride. We have to do the work, and in places it gets mighty steep. Without training and guidance, a devotee can just as easily fall into darkness as an unskilled mountain climber can fall to serious injury or even to his death. Claiming to know more than we do, or believing that we are more capable than we are, is certainly not uncommon. But it tends to signal that bad news is waiting to happen. The ego has an infamous reputation for reckless judgment when seduced by a strong desire or in defense of its own image. It seems, too, that people of my gender are especially susceptible to this because, as you probably know, real men don't ask directions. What makes that funny, of course, is the volume of empirical data that supports the joke. On the other hand, for men and women alike, I think it's fair to say that this earthly plane of existence is a pretty odd place to have landed in the first place. Just consider the setup. We are born into tiny bodies that require other people to feed and take care of us. And by the time we have come to some measure of self-control, we have already absorbed a great deal of misinformation. And that's because the people who have been our parents and our mentors in most cases are those people who have been parented and mentored by other people of an earlier generation who were trained in the same way, who absorbed that same conditioning themselves. I was in seclusion a few years ago when it struck me what a quite bizarre situation this is. Here we are, divine spirits, stuck in these rather peculiar low-efficiency vehicles that we've been given to travel around in, which slowly wear out altogether, and which seem in large part to run on impulse and confusion. Do you ever see it that way too? Now add to that the dictates of karma and reincarnation. We arrive here as infants, completely helpless, with the memory bank of our previous lives erased. We don't know who we are, where we have been, what we have done. We just know that we're suddenly here in this rather strange environment. Immediately, we are thrust into a system of duality. And what that means is that whatever we pursue in the way of a strong desire or any desire, it's going to carry the onus of an opposite downside effect as well. But people pretend this isn't true. And so as we grow older, we tend to think that way also, and we wind up wondering why it is that our happiness comes and goes. Why are we not able to sustain the peace of mind, the love, and just all of the goodness that we feel and want? Then one day, we are drawn to the teachings of Krishna or Jesus or the Buddha, or someone gives us a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and we begin to see a way out, which more correctly is the way in, into the center, the oneness of being itself. But to get there, we have to undertake a sacred mission, and it's a real whopper. Our task is to break the spell of the thousands of our delusions, slay all the karmic dragons that come flying at us, breathing fire, and silence the voice of the ego when it tempts us with some new trinket or worldly ambition. Do you think that having a guru might be a good idea? It took me over 50 years to come to that conclusion, and God knows how many, previous lifetimes of wandering in the desert of my own stubborn ways. To my credit, I was studious, but also terribly mental. I read inspiring books, I attended inspiring lectures, married an inspiring woman, and still those karmic dragons knew where to find me. My worldly desires and attachments were simply greater than my ability to let them go. When I came to Ananda, I resonated completely with Yogananda's teachings. I love the idea that truth is the only gauge of ultimate value. I accepted him as my guru, and I vowed to accept his guidance. However, that is not the end of the story. You might think that with such a vow, I would soon become a model disciple of good behavior. Would that it were so. Having a true guru, one who has been to the summit of self-realization, is not only the greatest blessing of this earthly existence, it is also the greatest test of our willingness to do what is asked in return. The trouble is that we, in varying degrees, are also still the disciples of our egoic tendencies. Have I always followed Master's unfailing advice? No, I have not. Have I always learned from making a mistake not to make it again? No, I have not done that either. In fact, I have a few mistakes that I continue to make every now and then, just to make sure that they're still really stupid. Nayaswami Ananta once described the spiritual path as about 3 feet long, from the base of the spine to the crown of the head. For those who may not be familiar with the chakras, suffice it to say that that all of our karma is contained in spinal centers along that 3-foot stretch. The one and only goal of life is to overcome each of those limitations. And when none remain, the soul is free of karma and the need to reincarnate. And for this, the reward is eternal bliss, which, by all accounts, is a pretty nifty place. Now, most of us can move 3 feet in a single stride. But Yogananda says it takes us 1,000,000 years or more to cover that distance. A staggering length of time in which to merge forever again with God. I trust that everyone here is at least on the home stretch. And given the sheer monotony of hauling all that karmic baggage over such an inconceivable span of millennia, a shortcut would certainly be a welcome intervention. And that's what the Guru gives us. You know, it's amazing what we get used to. I don't mean that life on earth is a plague of dragons. It's quite the opposite at times. Wonderful moments, loving people, personal victories, and all kinds of toys that we can play with. But in a sense, that is the problem. It leads us to simply be prone to all those errors that keep us on this path. They seduce us into a steady pursuit of desires, of pleasures that all of these things provide. And unfortunately, those pleasures have an expiration date which is usually rather short. What we have to do is not continue to try to extend that experience as we often do, because we can't. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a tree. You know, it's not going to stay there. Someone new to this path might well ask, what is it about these 5 fellows? What is it that we want to attune ourselves to? Why are they so important, or should be so important in our lives? And the answer is very simple. They have been where we are now. They have overcome every obstacle that we as human beings can encounter. They have been to the summit of self-realization, and they have returned to show us how to get there. But we have to do the work. Having the right teachings and the right techniques is not enough to finish the job. We have to open our hearts to the Guru's loving presence, open our minds to his wisdom, and take his hand in surrender to his will. Everything we want, that peace, love, and joy, is part of the bargain if we do. What is so hard to fathom, and I say this about myself, is why we continue to reach for the Jell-O, the hammer, and the nails. Each of us carries a different karmic load, but the road for all of us is the same. I find it very helpful to remind myself that never in Yogananda's life as an emissary of God did he ever say, do, or suggest to anyone anything that was not for that person's greater good and that was not an expression of truth. That's a mighty impressive track record. So the question becomes, who do I follow? Do I follow his counsel, or do I take my own that is generally provided by the ego? Whether or not you think you need a guru, you do. The elements these masters have given us to study and experience: energization, meditation, chanting, selfless service, satsang with other devotees, introspection, God remembrance, and Kriya Yoga. These combine to provide a way of life that is puncture-proof, dragon-proof, and best of all, fool-proof. All we have to do is want what we really want, God's bliss. Want it enough to want nothing else that simply comes and goes. I'd like to close with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, Paramahansa Yogananda's prayers and prayer demands. And I invite you to think of this as your prayer to the Guru. Help me to win the battle of life. O King of Kings, train in me, in the camp of discipline, the noble qualities of calmness and self-control. Be their divine general, like Krishna of yore, against the invading hordes of darkness, passion, and greed. Protect the celestial kingdom of my mind against entry by the tenacious warriors of evil. Let thy banner of peace wave always above the castle of my soul. Om.